Welcome to the Port Huron Statement. This episode is more than just an episode or just a story. This episode is clarity and maybe even an escape route for those who felt hunted or surveilled by something they might not be able to name, or maybe they can. For those who have noticed too many coincidences in too short of a time. For those who maybe thought they were paranoid or have been called paranoid, but know and remember what they saw or experienced or were subjected to. And this is for you. This episode's about gangstalking. Gangstalking is very real. It has history, it has infrastructure, and most importantly, it has a purpose. And there is documentation that can help you understand what's going on locally as it pertains to gangstalking. So, go into this a little bit. If you understand the purpose, what is being meant to be achieved through this technique, you can begin to unravel its hold and counteract the effects. Ultimately, it's always about inflicting isolation, ignorance, and control. This is always going to be a tactic of either Psywar technique, PsyOps, or a high control group. What is gangstalking exactly? It's the informal name for a set of psychological operation techniques designed to isolate, exhaust, and neutralize a specific target or to contain information. It often involves multiple people, often organized but sometimes not directly, sometimes unwitting accomplices engaged in synchronized acts of harassment, surveillance, or subtle manipulation. So sometimes people will be complicit in these things and not realize exactly what they're doing. They'll be asked to do something by a friend or maybe even paid to do it and be complicit in, a high control group or psychological manipulation operation. Targets in documentation about this report being followed. A lot of times they're intentionally harassed using auditory stimulus outside the house, outside their window, having people mimic their behavior or seek to get their attention that you don't know, or engaging in an unpredictable or bizarre way, but specifically singling you out, sabotaging you or obstructing you, tampering your device, or IMSI capture is a big one here. Spreading rumors about you, creating false history or past with you in order to discredit you or to isolate you, and also manipulating or infiltrating or executing influence upon institutions that you engage with as a means to obstruct and sabotage you. The whole pattern here is to inflict as much psychological and logistic damage and inconvenience and gaslighting as possible while maintaining plausible deniability. In fact, the whole goal is to inspire someone to try to explain something that makes no sense as a means to discredit them as schizophrenic, psychotic, etc. It's meant to literally enforce insanity or some other behavioral issue that can be then manipulated further to control the target. Each act will seem petty, coincidental, explainable, or that the observation must be incorrect and that the individual reporting the events must be crazy. That's the goal, is to make things seem nuts. To validate visions of grandeur or perpetuate conspiracy theories, that aren't correct. Because, of course, to have someone engage, or a group engaging gang stalking you, necessitates some form of conspiratorial element. So, and to gaslight someone and pretend like this couldn't happen, doesn't happen, or whatever, especially an individual that is possessing a lot of documentation and is able to rationally explain the circumstances, anyone that gaslights those individuals themselves are almost certainly complicit, so that's something to keep in mind. The whole idea is to surround you and also to get people in your sphere convinced that what they're doing to control and you over is actually in your best interest. So it's all about gaslighting gaslighting, control, enforced ignorance, suppression. Usually there is something that in particular a target will know or will represent that will be specifically targeted for suppression and discreditation. So why does this happen? To understand why, you have to understand power, not as brute force, but as control over perception and behavior and even information itself. High control groups, whether they're cults, intelligence agencies, extremist movements, or ideological bureaucracies, or even political entities of all types, militia groups, there are tons of examples. A lot of them are religious, a lot of them are not religious. But they always need to eliminate internal unpredictability once they become malignant and pathological. Because once they're malignant and pathological, the only thing that matters is loyalty, because anything other than loyalty is a threat. Because if the truth gets out, the very organization gets threatened. So they need internal, predictable, and controllable behavior. They need silence, they need suppression. And they need the appearance of consent and plausible deniability. They want to create a situation where almost all of their actions seem like they aren't all of these actions aren't related to the actual initiator of the actions by utilizing other individuals, and it's a massive discreditation thing. So if you're experiencing gang stalking and you can document it, then you should start considering why, and that'll tell you who. Usually, though, most people know who is behind it, even if that who isn't specifically the individuals that are actually stalking you, because, of course, it's going to be institutional. The goal is ultimately to create the image of, or the manufacture of consent, but consent can't always be manufactured through persuasion, misinformation, and control. Sometimes it has to be extracted by dismantling the target's reality. Gang stalking is a method of extracting surrender without violence. It's no-touch torture. It's behavioral conditioning. It's a massive, at-scale, collaborative gaslighting exercise. Its aim is to isolate the dissenter and to poison their relationships, their perceptions, their credibility, and to make them feel as though their own perception of that reality is likely flawed, and to make them feel hopeless, make them feel like their conclusions are flawed, and also that any data that they may receive is likely skewed, flawed, or whatever. Make them question everything. Especially the people around them. How it works inside the mind. Ambiguity. The actions never fully confirm themselves. You're left wondering, did I imagine that? Was that guy actually watching me? Did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? Is there something that justified this? So you're never going to actually have confirmation or closure about these events. They're always going to remain as anomalies that make you question your own perception. Isolation. You have friends fade away. Family starts using phrases that are contrary or suspicious. You're encouraged to seek help, but the help is often itself gaslighting, because when you inject this type of control into a familial system, you're also going to inject suggestions of treatment that will reinforce the control model. So, surveillance fatigue, you start censoring yourself, you change your routines, you become predictable in your avoidance. That predictability is exactly what they're trying to foster, because once you're predictable, then you can be subjected to control much more easily, obviously. Eventually, this stress forces you to talk, to warn someone, but when you describe the patterns, you sound crazy because you've been maneuvered into a narrative that matches clinical paranoia or schizophrenia or psychosis. That's the trap. That's the goal, is to make it so if you talk about the experience in an emotional way or to the wrong people, because a lot of these people will be intentionally placed in order to interpret your narrative in the most discrediting way possible. So there are very simple ways by which a clinical professional or psychological professional can make mild changes in a narrative and make them seem like wildly more pathological. Yeah. But this happens. This is a documented strategy that is utilized both domestically and internationally by U.S. intelligence services, armed forces, and even law enforcement is now being actively trained. We have a bunch of pretty damning examples, like COINTELPRO, the FBI program that specifically targeted civil rights leaders. We're talking about the people that we consider the great humanitarians of our time, or the 20th century, were targeted with psyops, disinformation, discreditation. They targeted their families and their friends. They lied to them, and they targeted them with honeypots to try and break up their marriages and stuff, like everything, financial sabotage, sabotage vehicles, and this is declassified. Then we have the Stasi's Zersetzung program, which is a noise harassment, and then obviously this is here social and economic sabotage, so making it so you can't get work, public humiliation, and then there's a lot of interesting, there are a lot of documents of the use of V2K, primarily the Fry effect, which is the microwave auditory effect, where you use pulsed microwaves. They resonate essentially your cochlea, which is the bone inside your ear. And so the bone inside your ear using microwaves essentially becomes like a speaker. So it sounds like the voice coming from within your head, because it's literally a noise coming from within your head. And using like Medusa technology, it literally can be a voice. And this is the type of technology that is being actively suppressed, that it exists, because it's effectively utilized by these types of groups in order to inspire paranoia and fear, and also control on their subjects. This includes mimicking the voice of God and voice of demons prolifically as a means to very directly and absolutely control individuals. So leveraging the, quote, voice of God is a very real technology. They call it technological telepathy, V2K. I encourage you to look this up because it is being deployed on American citizens. Anyway, so this ultimately results in an invisible prison. The hardest truth is that the tools don't require a single shadowy organization. They require and build a culture that then builds and demands certain beliefs and disbeliefs. It requires ignorance, ultimately. They require systems that default to doubt the victim and side with power always. And this is replicated very evidently in a lot of these religious entities' sort of internal justice systems, but it's also replicated by our criminal justice system vividly. I mean, if we look at the Jinx, that example of what it takes to prosecute a millionaire murderer, gives you a good example of what's really going on in our criminal justice system. And in fact, the American prison, despite, land of the free, this is what they call the big lie. You have to call it the land of the free while you're the most prolific incarcerator of humanity in history, but the primary incarceration isn't with bars. It's built of social cues, algorithmic nudges, professional risks, and the fear of ostracization, the fear of not being able to pay your mortgage because you depend on this social group to provide you with financial stability in X, Y, or Z fashion. The idea of enforced dependency. They're infantilizing you. And I'm not even talking about they is so many people. This is a universal system of exploitation in America that's being coordinated across a lot of high control groups. And so when it's affecting you, either directly or indirectly, there is a way out. It starts with naming what's happening clearly, calmly, and without shame. You're not broken, you were targeted. Probably because you have talent or intelligence or integrity. Those are the most likely reasons that you're going to be targeted. You're not imagining things, you're perceiving them too well. Too well for social acceptance, given the fact that social acceptance requires ignorance, silence, and active participation in insane and absurd oppression. All to advantage a status quo that is running this society and this planet into the ground while gaslighting everyone, pretending like something other than that is happening, because we know that is exactly what's happening. This is a massive manipulation. This entire society has become a massive manipulation where there is no actual merit to the money. It's been stripped through a series of massive bureaucratic scams, and ultimately it's drained the even possibility for legitimacy in a lot of these authorities. But in response to that glut of legitimacy has built this infrastructure of oppression and suppression, which is very, very personal and very vertical. The verticality of this is profound, and that's the most amazing part, is that you can be directly over by someone you've never met who's getting, who's preemptively destroying you because you represent some form of risk to an unjustifiable and exploitive system that they are extracting from. Ultimately, they're extracting value from human beings, and they are concealing it using a complex social machination that, if you become targeted, you are aware of. So there are a lot of people that are in this situation. Think of Nexium. Think of the Finders. There are innumerable instances of this type of exploitation that have happened and can be traced across history in the United States and elsewhere. So don't let the psy-op work. Just don't. It's a pathetic trick, and as long as you trust yourself and don't let a bunch of assholes tell you what you think and what you feel, you will start to recognize what is real and start to realize how you are being manipulated more and more by the minute. And it doesn't... There are a lot of layers of psychological control, and the Gangstalking element is among the most profound. And if you're experiencing something like this, then you are on the periphery of or within a high control group that feels a high degree of imperviousness to the law. So they're likely going to be either directly affiliated with law enforcement or intelligence services or some power broker, power player locally, regionally, or federally. And that's a fact of the society we live in, is that money is buying an ability to completely obfuscate law enforcement and even beyond that, get their cooperation in criminal activity. And the documentation of this is profound. It's even beyond that. If you look into the finders, you can understand that there is a history of not collaborating, but actually initiating profound criminal activity as a means to fund black ops. But it really does, because it's not even really about that, though. It's about, we'll talk about that later. We're talking about just the gangstalking right now. The first thing that you want to do is just document as much as you can. You'll start to, if you start recording things, audio, video, whatever, whenever it starts to get weird, or whenever you think that something like this happened, you'll start to see the same people, you start to see the same license plates. You'll start to be able to connect these people to some, and I mean, you probably already would know if you're in a gang-stalking situation exactly what the entity is, or who the entity is, or whatever, and you'll start to recognize that you can connect the people that you're experiencing in what are supposedly random or coincidental events are in actuality all directly linked to the same entity that you are, whatever. It takes work and it takes time, but if you start photographing, if you start video recording, if you start audio recording, you will be able to pick up the patterns, and then always document, write whatever you have down so that you can find the patterns yourself, and you'll start to notice that the patterns match very precisely with established psychological operations itineraries. Like, you know, these patterns are established. And so once you start seeing those patterns, then, you know, that it really is a confirmation that you're facing this type of orchestrated manipulation. You're going to want to try and you've got to stay calm. You can't, they're going to try and bait you into altercations and violence and stuff, and you cannot do that. You can't appear crazy. You know, you can't yell out or anything. You always have to maintain restraint and always be above it, because you are above it. This is a pathetic endeavor for human beings to pursue. And the fact that there are so many individuals that have been made so desperate as to be fertile for participating in these things, and that's like the environment that needs to be maintained in order to develop these types of cults and high control groups. And again, they're often created actually by intelligence services, and that the why to that is hilariously disgusting. But gangstalking is not about losing your mind. It's about systems trying to keep their grip on reality by eroding yours. The episode is not meant to frighten you. It's a statement of clarity, a lighthouse signal in a thick, artificial fog of simulacrum. You're not alone. There's no shame in what you saw or whatever it is that they're trying to say that you did to deserve this bullshit treatment. And there is life beyond this machinery. There's life beyond these lies. You don't have to die to actually be happy, because that's often the lie, is that the torture that you're experiencing in life is what you have to endure to go to heaven, and that's just a manipulation. That's just them selling you on their lie and never having to fulfill any promise until after you're dead. Just think about that. Just think about the fact that you're being tortured by someone that's making a promise to you that they have no way to prove or to verify, and they're promising said promise after your death. That is a manipulation. So if you're being manipulated religiously, especially, because that is usually the foundation, because the intelligence services have come to the conclusion that manipulating religion, especially in conjunction with V2K, is the most effective way to control people. So remember, manipulating religion, especially in conjunction with V2K, is the most effective way to control people en masse. So, along with gang stalking as a means to bring those that get out of the, that flee the flock back into the fold, as it were, to literally scare you back into believing. That's what gang stalking is about. Or if you don't get scared back into believing, to gaslight you into being committed so that you're not believed when you talk about the skeletons that whatever organization has in their closet. which, if you're being gang stalking, that also says that what you think you do know, otherwise they wouldn't bother to do this to you. If you're being gang stalking, that is a validation of what you have uncovered, discovered, experienced, etc. They don't bother gang stalking you if you don't know. Shucks. Anyway, let's get specific. Because these patterns of surveillance, manipulation, and psychological control, they're not theoretical. They've been exposed before. A lot of times before. And the fact that the general public isn't aware of how many domestic psychological operations have occurred, how many gang stalking implementations in these high control groups that have utilized gang stalking, both integrated into the intelligence services, integrated into religious, or with religious affiliations, and then also without either one. And anyway, so we're going to just start with Nexium. I just wanted to get one example. I might do two, but Nexium, for instance, was billed as a self-help group. In reality, it was a coercive control network that weaponized psychological manipulation, economic dependency, and sexual exploitation. Members were stalked, tracked, isolated, and turned against their families. They were branded, and all under the guise of personal development, self-help, corporate development, executive training. That's what it's supposed to be about. It's like, the best of the best to save the world, of course. The operation was sophisticated, but what made it work was simple: social pressure, secrecy, hierarchy, and surveillance. And by manipulating people's sincere desire to do good, exactly the tools that high control groups always reach for, Nexium mirrored the military intelligence grade PSYOPs, but it was operating in plain sight. And there are enormous numbers of examples of these. The COINTELPRO targeting civil rights leaders, again, that's a huge example. Scientology using fair game tactics to destroy critics. The Phoenix program during Vietnam, which blurred the line between intelligence and psychological torture. Each of these cases reveals the same skeleton beneath the skin: coordinated stalking, silence through shame, and control through fear. And the plausible deniability element. They're inflicting all of this while pretending like the victim is insane. It's all predicated on gaslighting, concepts, social psychology. The manipulation of truth through the enforcement of expectation, enforced behavioral expectation, which is just obedience. Recognizing the pattern is the first step, because once you can name the manipulation, it starts to lose its grip. That's the function of this podcast, not just to expose, but to equip and to enable. You don't need to consent to this architecture of fear. There's another framework, and we're building it right now. If Nexium revealed the way coercive control can masquerade as self-help, the Finder's case showed how such systems can nest inside institutions, shielded by power and secrecy. The Finders were a strange semi-public cult operating primarily out of Washington, D.C. in the late 70s and 1980s. Ostensibly, they were an alternative lifestyle commune. They're supposed to be Christian in nature, but reports quickly painted a much darker picture. Children living in squalid conditions, being tortured and being punished for not being devout or obedient enough, signs of ritualized abuse, coded communication, and enormous ties to intelligence agencies, which ultimately halted the investigation. In 1987, police in Tallahassee, Florida, picked up 2 well-dressed men in a park with 6 disheveled children. The kids were clearly traumatized. The case led to a raid on the group's properties in D.C., where investigators reportedly found troves of child pornography, snuff videos, devices for mind control experiments, including V2K, and documents that suggested international child sex trafficking. An enormous number of documents, and it implicated a lot of major and publicly known adoption groups that were integral in trafficking children. And then all of this disappeared. Anyway, the investigation was abruptly shut down. FBI documents later revealed that the CIA intervened, citing internal security matters and liabilities. Media coverage is completely ceased. No one was convicted. The children were returned to their captors, and the case was buried. Declassified documents that have only more recently resurfaced confirmed what everyone new and what the initial investigation had suggested, that the finders weren't a fringe cult. They were embedded in intelligence operations domestically. But the question is why? Why are you going to create a child exploiting cult? Why would the intelligence services do that? And the reasons are complex, but it has to do with providing sexually taboo appetites to powerful people and then using records of those taboo appetites as means of controlling them, and also using all of this as a mechanism for funneling money into intelligence operations that isn't visible to the Congress. But yeah, the finders weren't just traffickers, they were technicians of control. They were the first that we know of that were utilizing V2K with religion, so what they call technological telepathy. It uses microwave pulses to resonate the cochlea that creates sounds which can be manipulated as voices literally inside your head. And so they tell you that's the voice of God, and so they were knowingly manipulating V2K and using it to enable child sex trafficking and child exploitation. Because they would say that God needed it, God wanted it, whatever. They used isolation, trauma, group ritual, and sophisticated psychological techniques on both children and adults, just like Nexium, just like others. And gangstalking was crucial. And just peer pressure at large, by using large numbers of people to destabilize someone's view of reality and to reauthor their ethics. They're using Jesus as a means to enable child pornography. I mean, the amount of psychological dissonance there, the amount of control, coercive, violent control is enormous. And this is going on in America, and the amount of documentation is enormous. And I know that there are a lot of people out there locally that have experienced this as well. The finders remind us that gangstalking, or coordinated psychological coercion, isn't new, and it isn't always freelance. It is often institutional, sometimes protected, and when it is, exposing it becomes a threat not to just individuals, but to the systems that benefit from silence. That's why we need to talk about this, because it's going on constantly locally, and whenever this is going on, it always means something bad. In fact, always, it's child sex trafficking. I mean, there's not a case of this type of coordinated gang stalking that doesn't involve child sex trafficking. So that's what's going on. Good luck, everybody. Bonne chance, mes amis. I just want simple things.